So in those specific cases, they have to get really creative, and that opens the door for many, many different ingredients. You have anything that you can imagine, something that sounds familiar like rice, something, for example, like the grounds of coffee that can be also used as an ingredient. And as I say, it has to be a very regional answer. But for example, for United States, anything that is not corn or soybean meal could be considered as a non-traditional feed ingredient, and it will also change depending on the region of the country.
Hello, and welcome to the Swine podcast show. I'm Dr. Tara Donovan, your host, and today I have as my guest Diego Lopez. Diego is a Ph.D. candidate at Kansas State University in the program of feed science. Diego, welcome to our show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So before we get started, Diego, would you take a few minutes and introduce yourself to our guests, share a brief background of your career path?
Absolutely. So I'm originally from Colombia, so born and raised my whole life. And when I was there, I got a bachelor's degree in animal science, during which in my senior year, I had the amazing opportunity to come to the United States for an internship at the University of Illinois under the supervision of Dr. Hans Stein, which also allowed me to come back and start a master's degree on swine nutrition. Once I was done with my master's, I had a brief period of working in the industry for a company called Keys Manufacturing that specializes in the production of feed ingredients that are cheese-based. And right after that, I decided that I wanted to come back to the academia to pursue my Ph.D. And as you mentioned, now I'm a Ph.D. candidate at Kansas State University, where I'm working on the digestibility of nutrients and energy and how feed processing can affect that.
So today, Diego and I are going to discuss considerations in using non-traditional feed ingredients in diet formulation. So Diego, our Swine podcast audience is made up of professionals in all areas of the swine industry, and some of us, like myself, are not nutritionists. So can you start us off by just describing what you mean by a non-traditional feed ingredient?
Absolutely. So this is a very specific or more like a regional question. When you think about very traditional ingredients for the context of, for example, the United States, you think about corn, you think about soybean meal, you think about corn DDGs, right? So these are ingredients that are readily available. They're most of the time very cheap, and you'll probably not have many issues trying to use because there is so much research about them, and all the data available will help you to get a more informed opinion about the ingredient. But if we take a look to different places, we start having some problems where countries that cannot produce their own corn, countries that cannot produce their own soybean meal, we have a specific situations such as in Ecuador when they have to use all the corn or the soybean meal that the country produces before they can import some. So in those specific cases, they have to get really creative, and that opens the door for many, many different ingredients. You have anything that you can imagine, something that sounds familiar like rice, something, for example, like the grounds of coffee that can be also used as an ingredient. And as I say, it has to be a very regional answer. But for example, for United States, anything that is not corn or soybean meal could be considered as a non-traditional feed ingredient, and it will also change depending on the region of the country.
Have you considered adding cheese to your feed? Let us help. Keys Manufacturing is a family-owned and operated business, conveniently located in central Illinois. We have been producing Pro 88 cheese powder since 1997. Pro 88 is a high-quality source of protein and milk fat. Our cheese powder is research-proven to contribute to a smooth transition in early weaning pigs, being highly palatable, increasing feed intake, as well as delivering easily digestible nutrients. Check us out at keysmanufacturing.com for more information and links to our research. We look forward to helping you maximize your feed.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So as we start off, what are the steps that you recommend um, to take in approaching the use of a new feed ingredient?
Sure. So the first thing is, no matter what feed ingredient you're getting, even if you're getting it from a company that is providing it and just offering you this feed ingredient, or if it's something that you found it might be a good byproduct from any other industry and you want to take a look at how you can use it, I will say that the first step that you should take is try to do like a small pilot test with some animals. Try to feed it to a couple of pigs. Doesn't have to be anything more than that. Just to see what is the response of the animal. Most of the time, if you cannot afford a big laboratory to run a lot of analysis, or a university to run an experiment when you're not sure about an ingredient, just feeding it to the pigs will give you an idea of how the ingredient performs. If the pigs want to eat it, if the pigs feel attracted to it, if they are not rejecting the feed, that will be my first step, just to make sure that what you're giving the animal is something at least edible for them. I think the second step, and there might be a little bit of bias because of my background being from the University of Illinois and the program that I work on, it will be the uh, do a study on digestibility of nutrients and energy, um, because that will give you some idea of what loading values you can use during diet formulation. Once you have a more accurate idea of what the feed has to offer nutritionally speaking, then you can move into a more of a big trial with more animals and try to see what is the performance of the animals. If there is some concerns with anti-nutritional factors, you can factor that into your experiment, and then also try to see if there is some extra uh, bonus help that the feed ingredient can give you in your diets, like gut health or something like that. You can also factor that in to make it into the whole economical decision that will be to include the ingredient in the diet. And lastly, well, if you know that everything is working, and try to really nail down all those economical questions. Maybe that should be something that also should be considered in the beginning, but until you have all the information, these decisions can be a little bit difficult to make. But once you have all the information, all the loading values, you know how much your pigs are going to gain from it and how much you can get from this feed ingredient, then maybe you can make a more educated decision and decide if it's good economically speaking to give you some sort of profit.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So, how do you weigh the kind of that decision at the end? So you just discussed, the steps to take in deciding if this different feed ingredient or non-traditional feed ingredient is right for your diet. Um, how do you make sure that it's adequate and that it's right, the economical decision?
Absolutely. So on this, some of the experience that I have, I don't consider myself an expert on the area, but I have been exposed on both sides of the decision, both in deciding if you want to include something in a diet when I'm formulating diets in the university setup, but also trying to sell the ingredient to a company when I was working for Kids Manufacturing. And one thing that I noticed is that the price doesn't change, but the conditions of the company that wants to buy the product will change a lot. So one of the things that will influence this decision a lot is where the company is located and how much more money will cost to get the product into that spot, right? Um, so, for example, if I have my company in Illinois and I just have to deliver to Indiana, it might be a little bit different than if I have to deliver in North Carolina. So that's some of like the logistics and that you might have to take into consideration initially, and they are very important. It might not be very important in the nutritional department, but I'm pretty sure that the department of acquisition of your company is going to be very happy if you take that into consideration. And then once you kind of like iron out those little details, then you can start comparing what ingredient you have already in your diet and what you're trying to replace with. So in this case that I have, I don't know, some fermented soybean meal and I want to replace it with a cheese meal, which is the situation that I was found in myself a lot of times, we need to start comparing what is the composition of the two ingredients. Maybe one of them has more protein than the other one, but the profile of the protein is a little bit different. So a lot of times things that we can do is consider the price per point of lysine, for example, which will give you a more fair comparison between two proteins. Or if this ingredient that I'm adding on top of giving me some protein is also giving me some phosphorus, which will decrease the amount of inorganic phosphorus that I can include in the diet, which also factors in how much I'm decreasing the cost by adding this ingredient. So it is kind of like a game of what you can get, what you can replace, and try to take every single piece of information that you have available at the time to factor that in. And that's why I say that a lot of research and studies are your best friend when you're trying to make this decision.
Yeah, it sounds a lot more complicated than I probably ever gave it credit. So thanks for that explanation. So what should we keep in mind in regards to like not anti-nutritional factors or potential contaminants when you're looking into these types of feed ingredients?
Yes, absolutely. That's a very tricky question, because when we think about anti-nutritional factors, one, this concept can be very different, and it can be very broad or as well, because for example with soybean meal, right, we know that some oligosaccharides can be considered an anti-nutritional factor in nursery diets, but they are just part of the portion of the fiber of the ingredient. So trying to like distinguish what could be an anti-nutritional factor and what cannot be an anti-nutritional factor might be the first step. But then even when we know about these anti-nutritional factors, it's very difficult to try to measure them, because most of the times they are like small molecules or small particles or portions of the ingredient that are not very easy to analyze. So I think that when you have an ingredient that comes from a vendor or some supplier, the best thing that you can do is ask them. And most of the time, these people, well, not most of the time, these people want to be transparent with you and give you all the available information so you can include those ingredients in your diets. But here's where that initial study with just a few pigs can help you a little bit, because some of these anti-nutritional factors, you're going to see an effect on the animals. It could be a decrease in the feed intake. It could be a decrease in the performance of the animal. You could start seeing rejection of the feed for a high concentration of tannins or a high concentration of mycotoxin. And once you see that, maybe then you can start thinking, well, I reject this, or if I see a lot of value but I want to go forward, I can maybe take a sample of the ingredient and send it to a university or a laboratory to tell them, hey, what do you think it could be happening here? And thankfully, there is a lot of labs and quality assurance labs that might be able to give you some guidance on some of those ingredients. But for something completely unknown or a new feed ingredient, sometimes you just have to trust your vendor and just discover things along the way.
Great. So it sounds like having a relationship with your vendor is important. And then back to kind of to the beginning of our conversation is, let the pigs tell you whether this is going to work or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good relationship with your vendor, but even better with your pigs.
Great. So what about handling and processing of these feed ingredients at the feed mill level? Anything specific there you want to share with us?
Yeah, when it comes to the feed mill, I think one of the main things that mind goes to is the flowability of the ingredient. Sometimes it's very difficult to work with some ingredients that are very fine. I can give you the example of potato protein. I can give you an example of even cornstarch. It's not very common to use them in diets, but if you ever find yourself trying to use them in a diet, you're going to have a really hard time to make those flow. And after you have the diet mix, cleaning some of those ingredients could be a challenge. So on the logistics side as well, you might have some problems with ingredients that you don't know how to store. Some ingredients require different conditions of storage. Some ingredients might cake in the room temperature. Some ingredients might attract more pests than others. So that could be like the first two things that I will think about. And in the very specific case of, for example, nursery diets, when we pellet some of those ingredients, it won't hurt to also try to do a trial run of how the ingredient is performing during pelleting. Sometimes an ingredient that has a high content of moisture or high content of fat might be a little bit detrimental for the pellet quality. So that's kind of like what I would have in mind when it comes to handling those ingredients in the feed meal.
All right. So what I heard was flowability and storage. And if you're working with a pelleted diet, see how that ingredient might work in the pelleting process.
Absolutely.
All right. So what about, give me an example that you've experienced where using a non-conventional ingredient gave, the client or producer a competitive edge. Can you think of a scenario like that?
Yeah, I think in the past, not gonna try to go very into details of clients or something like that, but working with the case manufacturing, I found a company that was 30 minutes down the road of our manufacturing facilities, right? So just being able to deliver that product in just 30 minutes compared to maybe they having to like wait for fish meal coming all the way from Chile, all the way from Ecuador, it will be a little bit of a more convenient situation. And thanks to some of the research that we have conducted with some universities, we know that the performance of the pigs will be very similar. Also with including some extra nutrients that might be a little bit different here or there, maybe losing some of the nutrients as well, because it's impossible to match two ingredients perfectly. But logistics were a very big point for this company.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. Kind of seeing what other products locally might be there, might be non-traditional. I had my career in Wisconsin, and so I'm familiar with some producers using whey and also some byproducts from beer manufacturing, which also is a pretty big area in Wisconsin. So kind of looking locally and understanding how you can really save money on the transport cost by using some different non-traditional ingredients totally makes sense.
Absolutely. And I also like to think this in a way that the more you help that little company down the road, the more that little company down the road is going to help you at the end, And some of these ingredients are very interesting, and in times where we don't know how the price of corn or price of soybean meal is going to fluctuate because of external reasons, it's always good to have a backup plan just in case.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're kind of rounding up our time together today with Diego Lopez. And if you have comments or questions for him or anything on our podcast show, send us a message on your podcast platform. If you liked our show and like listening, please give us a thumbs up on your podcast platform. And Diego, before we end our conversation about non-nutritional feed ingredients, do you have any final thoughts or take-homes that you want to share at the end of our conversation?
Absolutely. I know from experience that once you formulate a diet, it's very easy to stick to a diet and try to not change it because it is a lot of work. But I invite everyone to be very open-minded to some of those non-traditional ingredients. Maybe take a look at what they have to offer and what they can do for you. I'm not saying that in every situation you have to include them, but it doesn't hurt to have some alternatives just in case.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So
It's time for our famous 3. When it comes to raising healthy, strong swine, the environment makes all the difference. Pancopia provides better environmental conditions for swine so that they can grow faster and more efficiently. Grow smarter, grow stronger, and watch your profits soar. Pancopia, the future of swine care starts here. Visit pancopia.com today to learn more.
So, Diego, what is your favorite book or resource that you use in your area of expertise?
I think the book that I have used the most is called Swine Nutrition Second Edition by Southern and I forgot the second author, but this book has helped me from the beginning of my studies as a nutritionist and up to this day when I'm more focused on feed manufacturing and feed ingredient quality. So it's a great book. I feel like every swine nutritionist should at least know about this book, if not also have it in their shelves.
And so, what about a book or resource that you use or your go-to outside of your area of expertise, just something that might be of interest to our audience?
Sure. Maybe this is more focused for the audience that are still in academia. But when you're writing articles and you start finding some information in very different places, not the traditional abstracts, papers, or books, the online writing lab from the University of Purdue has a great compendium on how to cite every single thing that you can think. Journals, it could be a thesis online, anything that you can imagine. They have at least a little bit of a suggestion on how to do that. And it has helped me a lot during my whole academic career.
I'm excited that you brought that up because a few years ago, I did a master's degree at University of Illinois. And one of the recommendations for writing our final project paper was to use the writing lab at Purdue. And I also found it very helpful. So no, that's a great example. And I was familiar with it, but hadn't even thought about it in terms of this show. So great.
Absolutely, yeah. I got exactly the same experience when I was writing during my master's at Illinois. That's where I got suggested to use it, and it has been nothing but helpful this whole time.
Yeah, very good. So last but not least, Diego, share with us an attribute or characteristic that you feel sets successful professionals apart from others.
Yeah, I think your capacity to be personable. I think those soft skills are probably one thing that I have noticed that make a big difference. I think with enough effort, a lot of people can learn the theory and everything behind any field, but being able to, have a good conversation with someone and just create a new relationship out of the blue is a great skill to have in our industry.
I completely agree. And so thank you so much for the conversation today. It's been great to learn from you and your experiences, and I'm sure we'll see you again.
Thank you so much for having me.